Hello, everyone. Today, or for this video, hopefully we'll get through chapter 3 on the PowerPoint in the book Essentials of Strategic Management, The Quest for Competitive Advantage by Johnny Gamble, Margaret Peteruff, and Arthur Thompson, just in case you were wondering who the authors of the book were. All right, I hope to get through this one quick. Yeah, and I'm sure most of you are laughing. the I want to get through the chapters because to me, this is what's laid out in a textbook for a class such as ours, a capstone type course that is just trying to make sure you are fully familiar with strategic management, which is the title of our class. And let's make sure. Oh, come on. There we go. Okay. I may just keep that up there. All right. So here we go. Chapter 3 talks about evaluating a company's external environment. The first thing I want for you in your mind to pop into place is Porter's five forces and a PESTEL analysis. That's the tool, or that's a quick way to understand what questions are we asking when we're trying to look at the full landscape. Later on, we'll talk about the internal factors in the company, but today we're going to talk about the external. So some of our learning objectives identify factors in a company's broad macro environment that may have a strategic significance. Think PESTEL, the political, the economic, the socio or sociological, technological, environmental, and legal. I think that's all of them. So those are the factors that we're monitoring and watching, and that is not to include the Porter's five forces portion, which is direct competition. I think later on there's a diagram that helps you to understand it a little better. We want to recognize the factors that cause competition in an industry to be fierce, more or less normal, or relatively weak in nature, and map market positions of key groups of industry rivals. Who are we going up against? Excuse me, and determine whether an industry's outlook presents a company with sufficient attractive opportunities for growth and profitability. Um, yeah, I don't know where that one's going. We're gonna keep moving forward. Uh, we're gonna keep going. These are good questions to ask, but they're not the topic to which we are trying to look at and we are trying to ask. Um, they're just discussing it. Here's the diagram I was talking about. Okay, so here, perfect diagram of when we're thinking about a 30,000, 10,000, 5,000, 1,000, 100-foot view of the company and its operation. This is probably much higher up, is that macro environment is the PESTEL environment, the political, legal, environmental, technical, technological, sociocultural, and economic. PESTEL, that's the macro when we're talking about strategy in business. Then you have internal, okay? The internal is the Porter's five forces, if you haven't figured out the connection. And then inside that, you would have the company, which then we get into managerial economics, you get into finance, you get into accounting, you get into marketing, positioning, those types of things. All, if you look at this as a scope of trying to understand the world, this is a pretty good one. Okay. So again, here you have the company, internal management and controls. You might use, like, let's say, a balanced scorecard approach. Outside of that, we're trying to figure out how does the company relate to all of these. That's Porter's five forces. And then outside of that, you have the PESTEL. So when we're trying to figure out where we go as a company, those are the things we're looking at. So a part of what some of your projects are going to be is I'm going to have you pick a company and then you're going to do a PESTEL analysis to try to find the relevant issues that exist. Then within there, I'm going to have you complete a five forces analysis to figure out what's going on in the direct environment or the competitive environment. Good diagram. When you hear macro environment, please instantly go to PESTEL analysis when we're talking about business. By the way, if you're an econ major, not a business econ major, but you're studying economics to maybe go on to get a master's in economics or a PhD in economics, you need to be aware of this. But what I want you to understand is this is business is applied. It's the company. How does the company compete in this environment? How do we function? How do we not only survive, but maybe even thrive? So we're not talking about huge, like a political analysis is not talking about political issues that are of almost no bearing to the company. We're talking about political situations that have a lot of consequence on the company. I'm not saying one couldn't, I guess, but so just a warning if you're in the regular econ program, this is applied. It's well, strategic management, which is BADM. All right, let's keep rocking and rolling. That's the pestle analysis. This does not get very deep, by the way, guys. A pestle analysis literally is understanding macroeconomic issues relating to the firm or the concern of the firm. Okay, and this one they use PETSEL. Uh, and then see PETSEL, but up here they do PESTEL. Oh, we're trying to get away with something here. Not really. It does. Sorry. Back to it being deep. The depth. Yeah. If you notice, we keep having to go back to that master strategy and tools document. There's a reason I created that. What's all this? InShot. The reason I keep going back to that is because that document gives you a detailed analysis of those things. So here we have the Porter's five forces and the pestle. Not pesto, pestle. Some of you are probably like, Bruce, not funny. I don't care. I thought it was funny. Someday, if you're teaching the class, you can decide what's funny. All right, here we go. So here is all of the things that you would probably include in a Porter's five forces analysis. I tried to exhaust each one of those things that would be found in the analysis. So you could go out and you could research this and say, if you're General Electric and you're trying to create a Porter's five forces analysis, I know most of you, the first thing you're going to do is go to AI, but then you're going to be like, well, I got to make sure I've touched on all these topics. So that's a list of all the things that you want to pay attention to that again have bearing and impact on the company, either directly or indirectly. Then we go down here and we have the PESTEL analysis, the political, economic, socio-technological, environment, and legal. And I've put down all of those topics that you could list to include in a PESTEL analysis. All right. So for socioeconomic or sociocultural factors, population size and growth. In the United States right now, we have a shrinking population. If you've ever wondered why so many politicians for so long weren't trying to stop immigration at the border, in part, and it was actually had a lot to do with the Republican Party, is because the reason they wanted those folks coming over is it was cheap labor. And they could make a lot more money when they had illegal immigrants that were coming in that would get, I think it was called an EB-5 visa. So maybe they were already in here, or maybe they came in here for that reason to go work at said company and make not a lot of money. So it was actually the Republican Party for a long time that was the one that didn't want to shut the spigot off. Now you have as of 2025, you have the Democratic Party that's fighting back and saying, no, we want to allow these people to come in. One of the realities, if you listen to the economists, why you want to be bringing those people in is because people stopped having kids in the United States. Our population size is shrinking. It used to be 20 years ago, the average household had like 2.5 kids or 2.7 kids or something like that. Now I think it's less, it's like 1.5 or less, maybe one. And it used to be every household had zero point 0.7, 70% of a dog. Um, they were short dogs. Sorry. But that gets into all the issues that you would find underneath the pestle analysis. Okay, so if you were wondering, a couple of things to note. Right now, the Porter's five forces is probably the most widely used model to strategize in competition. Now, there's a couple of realities here, so let's go ahead and jump back to our Word document. When we talk about Porter's five forces, the reality is if you're internal to a company, you're running a company, these these forces, I like the use of that, these forces are going to have a direct impact on all of the leadership of the company. They're hopefully if you have competent management, and I'm not talking just about a competent CEO, I'm talking about competent executives, competent junior executives, people that are running the divisions and things like that, they should be well attuned to the forces that are acting upon them when they're making decisions. Now, what does that mean? It means that they're probably well aware of all of these threats. Okay. They're probably very well aware of it. And they're clearly going to be aware of the competition among the competitors. So, what I want you to deduce is there might be some non-trad students in here, but for most of us that would be 20 something years old, understanding Porter's five forces can be a bit of a challenge because you're not in the environment where your paycheck's kind of dependent. If you're running a company, your paycheck's dependent on understanding these forces. What does that mean? It means if these executives were to sit down and go through this five forces stuff, they wouldn't need to Google anything. They would probably be well aware of the current situation under each one of these four external forces, and they should be very clearly aware of their direct competitors. So completing a five forces analysis should be quite easy. Once you've completed the five forces, some of it then turns into like game theory. If we take this action, what is our direct competitor going to do? If we take this action on the other four forces, what's going to happen for our bargaining power of buyers? What about our bargaining power of suppliers? Um, are there substitutes out there that if we get too high priced, others are going to want to get that or are going to be able, our customers are going to buy those substitute products. And are we in a situation where profitability and profit margins are so high that we're going to have new entrants just streaming in? As I mentioned to you, I'm reading one of Porter's books right now that establishes his five forces, but I think it's the textbook he used at Harvard for many years, which is the application of Porter's five forces. I'd love to say it's a thrilling read, but it's not. And I get into this stuff, so that's kind of actually telling you something. Anyway, okay. So, point being, with our PowerPoint slide here, Porter's five forces is usually the thing we're using to try to figure out how do we move forward. On top of that, we had the video that I had critiqued, or a response video that I know was pretty positive, but very, very well said, well done, because when you go into the internal environment, if you're a business consultant or you're an executive and you're working in a company, it is not uncommon for executives and other managers to want to create plans to reduce anxiety. But as Dr. Martin said, that's you're going to have angst because you're not going to be able to predict what's going to happen next. There's going to be unknowns in that regard. So the Porter's five forces is just helping you figure out how do you win the game. Do you try to win it in the short term? Do you try to win it in the long term, which is usually 5 to 10 years? And how are these forces going to enact upon us? And then this just breaks out the five forces. The diagram I give you is very similar to this diagram in the PowerPoint. Let's keep flying through. Now they're just going to talk about, well, this might be a good one to pay attention to. So when is the bargaining power of buyers stronger versus weaker? Usually when their costs of switching to competing brands or substitutes. So this could be customers, or if we were talking business to business, this would be the next player in the maybe a manufacturing facility buying raw materials that you're mining out of the ground or something. That's what a buyer is. So it could be a customer, could not be a customer. But that customer, that person that's buying your product, the costs of switching to a competing brand are relatively low. So therefore, eh, the buyer can knock down the price, or they have a stronger negotiated position to do that. Um, their size, their large size allows them to demand concessions. So when Walmart's buying light bulbs from General Electric, guess what? Walmart's the main buyer. They're the ones that are buying the $20 million of the, or 20 million units of the 100-watt General Electric standard light bulb. When they're buying 10 million units, they have a lot of leverage over the per unit cost and a bunch of other negotiated positions in there. There are few in number, control market access, or if a buyer and customer is particularly important to a seller. Again, could be because of size or something else. Let's just keep rocking and rolling. I don't want this video to take very long because you already should have watched a couple of videos that help explain a lot of this. Um, I really, I think these PowerPoint slides are okay to read through. I'll just stay on here for a second if you want to hit the pause button and you can read through this. Might want to read through this one as well. The problem with each one of these PowerPoint points is our bullet points is that if you're depending on what industry and what company you're talking, this could mean 75 different things. So it's a little bit hard to memorize everything when you're not in a situation to apply it. So if one of you works at First Bank and Trust in Brookings in town, if you were to apply this, it's a lot easier for you to do that than to memorize every competitive force for, 1,000 different types of industries. Kind of becomes impossible. Again, I'm just going to have you guys read through these because it's just going to take too much time. Not that it's not good information, it's just very, very generalized. Then we have direct rivalry. Um, you will want to know these for an exam. The four explanations of the level of rivalry in an industry or in a market arena or market. You have cutthroat, which is obviously brutal. Competitors engage in protracted price wars or employ other aggressive tactics, mutually destructive to profitability of both firms. You have to understand kind of the basics of economics to understand strategic management because of the supply and demand, elasticity, inelasticity. Um, Strategic management is, I mean, anyone can kind of teach it, obviously. But I would say more often than not, you have applied economists that do the main research on it. Microeconomists, by the way, not macro. Uh, if the competition is fierce, you have vigorous market share battles, reducing the profit margins of most industry rivals to bare bone levels. Moderate competition, maneuvering among industry rivals, while lively and healthy, still allows for most rivals to earn acceptable profits. And then very weak should mean um, industry rivals are satisfied with their sales growth and market share, rarely undertake offensive actions against their competitors. One of the things, so this is where we really have to understand Porter's theory is if you're in an industry like this and profit margins are very high and um, the cost of entrance into this market is low, then quite quickly you're going to go from maybe weak to cutthroat. Now, one of the reasons that doesn't happen, even though profit margins might be quite high, is because most of the players in that market might be private companies, not publicly traded companies. Private companies, especially those owned by one or two owners or three, whatever those owners kind of want to do, they can do if competition is not like cutthroat or fierce. They can do what they want. Typically, though, if you're in a fierce or cutthroat economic environment and you have fairly strong profit margins or high profit margins, over time, you're going to see entrants and people coming in there trying to compete. Or you're going to get a Bruce Johnson that's going to go run a company. Maybe there's four players in a certain market that are manufacturing something, a competitor. Might be vacuum cleaners. You have Kirby, you have Shark, you have Dyson. You have all these players that are in there, and maybe all of them are private companies. So they have individual owners. The problem is, even though that they can do whatever they want to do because they own the company, that doesn't mean that you're not going to get somebody that's going to come in like a Bruce and they're all of a sudden going to start playing the game and playing to win. And then they beat all of the three or four other players in there at this game. And then you've put them out of business. Okay. That's why a sustainable competitive advantage is so vitally important, is because that, and why you have to guard it with your life, is because that's gives you the reason why people are probably buying the product or service. It's what makes you special. It can be found in a product differentiation or a niche market. And by the way, I had a student email me about this, and yeah, we better talk about it now. So, one of the things to remember is a diversification and a diversified product are not necessarily the same things. Okay. The diversification is not, if it's a partial diversification, that's acceptable. Let's go look at the diagram. A diversified product might just mean that you're finding it's not the same as a diversified, oh God, how do I say this? The diversification that we're looking out for is in which the company is doing something it doesn't know how to do and it's selling to someone that they've never sold to before. When we talk about diversification, that's what we're trying to stay away from. That is different than product uh, differentiation. That's the word I was looking for. Product differentiation can mean usually you still know what you're doing with the product, but maybe you're changing it just a little in order to reach a new set of customers, but you're not doing something you don't know how to do. Okay. So you might be partially diversified or even kind of limited diversification, but you're not fully diversified and operating in a realm that you know nothing about. That's what we want to avoid. So differentiated products and diversification are not the same thing. They're different things. Okay. You can have a diversified product line that, or excuse me, a differentiated product line that doesn't necessarily mean you're diversifying. So, kind of an important one to know. Well, let's keep rocking and rolling. One thing to remember is that those five competitive forces are never steady state. They can be, I guess, but a lot of times they're 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 moving and it's a moving target. So you have to make sure you're being aware of the changes in that competitive landscape when a competitor or a buyer or a supplier, something changes. So it is very much like a game. You have a lot of, especially in competitive environments, you have people that have certain personality traits or psychometric traits that do really, really, really well in an environment like that. Those are the same people that seem to do very well in like a combat environment where things are constantly changing. Some people thrive on that. A lot of people do not thrive on that, and it, well, gives them a headache. So you might want to know, are you the type of person that has a strategic mind for this type of thing? A lot of people don't. That doesn't mean you shouldn't get into business. It just means maybe don't get to the top of the echelon and say, what am I doing here? Oh, Yeah, let's just keep going. Let you guys read this. So what we're asking here is what is the driving force of change in an industry? Okay. What causes things in the industry to change? It might be external, it might be innovation internal to a company. If you're managing the company, you want to figure out what are those driving forces. Um, and they're just talking here. Usually there's not like 75 things that are causing change in an environment. In most businesses, most business environments, by the time we're in 2025, innovation is often incremental. Well, it goes up and down like a roller coaster ride. 1 minute innovation can spawn so much change and revolution that you can't keep your head straight. And then for like 30 years, there won't be anything great or new in there. So when you're trying to manage the company, you're trying to figure out what is it that causes the change? Is it you have customers that okay, they're kind of satisfied with the product, but they'd really like it to do this. Or if they're offered the option of doing something this way, they have a preference for that. Now just scratch what I'm saying. Go ahead and just read this. These are common driving forces. Please, I would try to remember this page, maybe copy and paste it into a Word document for your notes. These are common driving forces. Change in long-term industry growth rates. Think about the product life cycle. Oftentimes, companies will plateau, maybe because the market is saturated. Globalization usually is a common driving force. The internet and technology, people who buy the product or service change, or how they use it changes. There's product innovation, there's technological change or manufacturing product process innovation. Artificial intelligence is forever becoming oh, that just AI should freak all of you out because all of you are gaining an education in a world where now you have to directly compete with artificial intelligence. Um, there's an old cliche that you're not gonna lose your job to AI. You're gonna lose your job to someone that knows how to read and run AI. That's who you're gonna lose your job to. And then that one person that has AI acts as like four employees because they can become very efficient at utilizing AI. Market innovation, how something is sold, can be a driving force of change. Entry or exit of major firms, diffusion of technological know-how, patents can go away. There might be a change in cost and efficiency. Costs might go up or they may shrink because production of raw material becomes much easier or more accessible to more people. Growing buyer preferences for differentiated products instead of a standardized commodity or commoditized product. Regulatory influence and governmental policy change, and changing societal concerns, attitudes, and lifestyles. Um, Vehicles are, well, I can't even predict what's going to happen next in that world. But for example, vehicles, when you move to more suburban areas, people are trying to not purchase, you know, Ford F-350 pickups right now. They're trying to buy smaller and more efficient and more cost effective. In South Dakota, we're still going for the F-350. The next thing your book talks a little bit about is strategic group mapping. Let me see if I can find something here. Um, this is very closely related to what's called a position map. Here we go. That's what I was looking for. So on a number of different dimensions, usually it's characteristics that are in demand in one way, shape, or form or another by the customer or the buyer, usually influence how you create a market positioning map. They're calling it a strategic group map, whatever you want to call it, same, same. So here is What do we got here? Geographic coverage. I don't like that one. That's stupid. And then you have price or service, so high end versus low end or cheap or inexpensive for pizza would be the two dimensions. So you start placing all of these in their respective environments. That way you can try to figure out, well, who are you directly competing with? Um, let's see. If you look at California Pizza Kitchen or Blaze Pizza or MOD Pizza, I haven't eaten at any of these, but I'm assuming they're much higher end, probably the Neapolitan, where they slide it in on that hot oven and it tastes really good. But it's probably going to cost you a little more. And when you buy that, you're not buying it because you want to just hurry up and get something in your stomach. You're buying it because you want a higher end, better end. So the question is, well, is Blaze Pizza a direct competitor to Domino's? And the answer is not really. Um, there are some people that will never eat Domino's that might eat Blaze Pizza. There's also customers at Domino's that are not going to pay $32 for a large pizza. So they have their kind of own niche, or their not their own niche, their own value discipline might be a better way to look at it. The closer the groups are in the map, the stronger the cross group rivalry. Um, if we go back, Pizza at Domino's, Little Caesars, Papa Murphy, Papa John's are all they compete kind of head to head with each other. Where again, Blaze Pizza probably doesn't compete very much with Little Caesars. I'm not a fan of Little Caesars, by the way. So here they're asking critical analysis questions about what are things you're going to want to pay attention to when your rivals are making competitive decisions. I'm learning that my microphone, depending on where I'm talking, goes to one ear or the other. So my apologies if that's driving you nuts in some way, shape, or form. Okay, well, let's keep rock and roll. So your book talks about KSFs, key success factors. Um, these are some examples. I almost never hear the term KSF as key success factors. You hear KPI, key performance indicators, all the time. KPIs and KSFs are probably KSFs are not the same thing, but I just have not heard of KSFs almost anywhere. Um, those they're related though. Let me, phrase that a little bit differently. They are related. How do we tell if we're doing what we want to do? What factors are involved in trying to accomplish that? And these are just examples of key success factors defined in a number of different categories. So, a technologically related key success factor might be obtaining expertise in a particular technology or in scientific research, maybe the proven ability to improve production processes, manufacturing related success factors. God, I would think that would fall into there. Might be the ability to achieve economies of scale or economies of scope in your production that you couldn't do a certain before this had happened. Um, Distribution, supply chain, those types of things. Maybe you've established a strong network of wholesale distributors or dealers. You have a strong direct sales capability that you didn't possess before, or you've been trying to establish or work towards. You have the ability to secure favorable display space on retailer shelves. That would be a distribution key success factor. I'll let you read the marketing. All right, we'll go to the next slide if you want to hit pause and you can read that one. Again, these factors are need to be in alignment with the value discipline. That's that like that's about this is just my opinion. That's about 80% of what this is trying to communicate is you need alignment. We don't want to be Walmart in trying to compete on customer service or by having the best products. because that's not why people are buying here. You don't want to have key success factors in an environment where you're not you're not formulated to do that. Again, the value to it needs to be in alignment. Um, Examples of industry key success factors. There's increased or learning of particular technologies and therefore establishing expertise, economies of scale. If you've heard of a learning curve, over time, companies get better and better at whatever it is they're producing. Once they get there, they can do it more efficiently and more effectively with fewer resources. That's that experience curve or learning curve. There's a utilization, which also goes to economies of scale, a network that can be established. There's brand building. This is a huge one we're seeing now with like influencers, YouTube influencers, and their ability to sell. Maybe an increase in key locations. Yep, you're going to want to know this one. So, does the industry offer good prospects for attractive profits? If the answer is no, then you, as a company, probably don't want to go into that industry if you're not already operating there. If you're already operating there, then you maybe want to go back to your key success factors to figure out what do we need to do to win the game. Um, Usually, if we think of the Boston Consulting Group model, yeah, let's go back to our diagram here. There we go. If you think about the Boston Consulting Group matrix, which is we classify our products in one of four ways. They're cash cows, which you usually see when a product line is at maturity and the manufacturer's gotten really good at making this. You have the star, which is usually there's clear growth potential, but overall saturation might be still a ways off, but it still could exist. A question mark is we don't have really high growth. We really don't know we don't know if this is going to work yet, might not. And then you have dogs, which are typically product lines that are either just they're not going anywhere, they're not doing anything, nobody wants it, or it's a product line that is in so much of a decline phase, they just kind of done training. In any of those capacities, when you think about it from that aspect, that helps tell you what the profits or profit potential will be in that industry. Are you operating where both the firm and its industries have high growth potential? Saturation is a ways off. How strong is internal industry competition? Are there future driving forces that are causing things to where everybody wants one now? If you looked in, I remember no, it was 2000, and my roommate got a cell phone, and he asked me, he's like, "Are you going to get a cell phone, a little flip phone thing?" And I'm like, "Why would I want that? I don't want anybody to get a hold of me now." I was in the Marine Corps. I had a landline, but I had no need for it. Plus, it was really costly if you wanted to make long distance phone calls or phone calls that were on other networks. So it didn't make a lot of sense for someone like me to have a cell phone because it would have been so horrifyingly costly. Um, Little did I know if I had to predict that in a 10-year period, everyone and their dog would have a cell phone, like literally everyone. Um, that's not something I could have predicted. So there was a driving force behind that. Uh, might have been just because by the time, 10 years later, everybody had one. It was just weird if you didn't have one. Um, how strong is the rivalry and competence in performing the industry's key success factors? What does success look like? All righty, we are going to go ahead and stop here. Again, we're just flying through chapter 3. You're going to see repeat of a lot of the same things. If when you're listening to this, you want to turn it on 1/2 speed or any future videos, maybe do that for a little bit and see if you can still understand and retain the information. Hope you have a good rest of your day, and we will check in the next video, which should be on chapter 4.